London AIM-listed sustainable timber company Woodbois, formerly Obtala, is an African-focused business which gives investors exposure to forestry, timber trading, reforestation and voluntary carbon credits. From its forestry acreage in Africa, it holds 470,000 hectares of natural forest concessions in Gabon and Mozambique. It recently reported what it said was a significant increase in profit margins and double-digit growth at its production facilities. Paul Dolan is Chief Executive. He joins us now here in the studio. Paul, welcome. It's good to talk to you.
Morning, Jeremy. Thank you.
I want to start off, first of all, with the straightforward, ordinary question. Why Woodbois? What is it about the company that is something that we should be looking at as an investor?
I think two reasons. So one, we're a rapidly growing company. And the second, of course, is that in the transition to a net zero carbon economy, timber and sustainable timber in particular is a critical sector.
The sustainable part is really, really important, isn't it? Because I know that reading around the subject of the area which you cover, you come up with all sorts of searches around the deforestation in the Amazon and so forth. It gets a lot of bad press, timber. Have you found much sort of a headwind in that? Do you find it difficult to get over your case?
I think it's obviously the first hurdle to investment, but actually, if you look at the Zoological Society of London's report on all of the tropical timber companies across the world that they do every year, you'll see Woodbois for the last 3 years has been in the top 10 of those companies in terms of its transparency and its sustainability.
Yeah. We talk about reforestation, the forestry concessions you have, but in fact, it's not just timber you do, is it? Because you also do, I think, so blockboard and veneers. Is that right? Explain how that fits into the timber business and how your business is spread across those three areas.
Yeah, so I think, first of all, the construction sector is responsible for 1/3 of carbon emissions globally.
Right.
And it's growing. So we're already seeing a transition towards the use of timber products in construction and away from concrete and steel. So within that, of course, there are there's your normal beams that we produce, but also plywood. So the veneers that we make go into plywood, and we've invested $15 million over the last 3 years in both our sawmills and our veneer factories.
So how do you do all this sustainably?
How do you?
Yeah.
Yes, it's a really good question. And actually, most African countries have very strict management plans, and they typically follow what's called continuous cover forestry. Now, the way that works is if you can imagine a rugby pitch, which is 1 hectare, there are typically between 500 and 1,000 trees on that hectare of all different sizes. So the way we're allowed to harvest in line with the management plans is we can take out maybe 5 trees out of that 500 to 1,000. And after we've done that...
Is that per year? Or
in 1 year.
One season.
But in one season. But once we've done that, we can't go back on that hectare for 20 years. So you can see it's very, very low impact. It's completely the opposite of what happens, for instance, in the Amazon where you have clear cutting.
Mm. What sort of trees are you growing there? What are you taking out and what are you replacing them with?
So in Gabon, the most popular species is okume, but there are lots of other species as well. And that typically goes into, on the veneer side, it's very good for outdoor shuttering, that type of thing. But as I mentioned, plywood, and then window frames and...
So is this a slow-growing hard timber that the Amazon is known for the big hard timbers that they produce? Or is it something that's akin to sort of the pine end, the softer end? What is it you're growing?
So okume actually is probably between a hardwood and a softwood, and it does grow extremely fast. But there are hardwoods as well, slower growing hardwoods, which are much heavier and used for decking and that type of product.
As we approach COP26, there's a lot of people talking about this sustainability and, of course, the environment and so forth. You launched a carbon sequestration division, I believe, was it March this year? Yes. I think it was, wasn't it? Yeah. What drove you into that to begin with, and how are you going to capitalize on that as an advantage for an investor in Woodbois?
Yeah, so this was something we looked at several years ago, but the pricing just wasn't there for carbon at that time. But if you look at the ETS carbon market now, it's up trading at 60 euros. We operate in the voluntary carbon space, where the typical price per ton of CO2 is is probably closer to $10. So we see a convergence over time towards that $60 and actually to much higher levels. I mean, the fact is we need to sequester more carbon. CEOs right across the planet have signed up to be net zero by 2050. And one of the ways that they're going to get there is to actually plant trees and grow forest. We're actually on the ground in Africa. We've got 20 years experience of doing exactly that.
Just want to take a little sidestep, if I can, away from Wood Bois and talk a little bit more about what you just said about the voluntary sector here. My understanding is the opposite of voluntary is the regulated market.
Correct.
Is that right?
Correct.
Within this carbon. Just explain what the difference is between the two. And as you said, you already fit into one area of that. What is the other area that is? Yeah,
so the regulated sector you see in Europe, in North America, in these developed markets. But the voluntary sector, can cover right across the world. And Mark Carney was mandated by the UN to set up a task force to really standardise the voluntary market, the voluntary carbon market, to try to drive investment into it.
Let me just return again to the other area that I spoke about at the top, and that is where you are. You've just reported your Q3. You've got some pretty ambitious targets to target in Q4, and I think one of those is to go cash flow positive, I understand. Just explain, first of all, what's been happening in Q3, because you're building a business here which is improving its output, it's improving its EBITDA targets, and it's improving its revenue and so forth. What happened in Q3 to give you that boost, that leg up?
Well, really, it's over the first 9 months of the year where production was up 130% almost in the sawmill, and up 80% in the veneer factory, and that's partly new equipment coming online, and it's partly the way we've been training people. We brought a head of continuous improvement, for example, almost a year ago, to put first world working standards and practices into something that's 400 miles from the capital in Gabon, and it's astonishing actually just how much improvement we've made in our production in that time.
And what's Mozambique and Gabon like working in as an environment, as a tax environment and an operational environment, so far as business is concerned? Are they 100% supportive, or do you get a feeling there's a pushback?
No, I mean, Gabon in particular is incredibly progressive in terms of forestry. And you see that there are so many examples of that. And, one example is the fact that they've grown a sustainable timber industry over the last 20 years. And yet they don't suffer deforestation. The country is 87% forest cover versus 13% in the UK. And in terms of how the business works, of course, we sell to 40 or 50 different countries around the world, and we collect dollars and euros typically into Copenhagen.
Okay, with that backdrop, how do you intend, or how do you see the company going cash positive?
Well, really everything is set up because we've made the investment in the equipment. We've got even more equipment coming online at the back end of this year, and again the following year. So there's room for a lot of growth there. And really, it's a case of, can we get the containers out on time by the end of the year? Because the production is there.
Yeah. And what's the balance sheet looking like to do that? Is all that equipment paid for?
The balance sheet is I think certainly the best shape it's been in since I came into the company. We took on a big restructuring because we went into COVID with $50 million of net debt, and we brought that down last summer to about $7 million. So balance sheet is in excellent shape.
So where do you go from here? Let me bring up a share price just to give an idea as to what's happening. Currently, it's an AIM-listed stock, as I said at the top, 4.2 pence. We're well off the highs, as you can see. What do you say to investors about where the share price is? I think market cap's around about 80 million, I think, at the moment, isn't it? At the moment. How do you assess the value of the business when looking at the share price? What are the two numbers?
Well, of course, there's lots of different ways to assess the value of any business. For me, and I'm clearly invested in the business. I've got 4% of the company. Right. So clearly, like many CEOs, I feel that it's undervalued at the current price.
And how do you assess that undervaluation?
Well, I mean, multiple ways. I mean, one would be just looking at the biological assets on the balance sheet, which are roughly double the today's market cap. But of course, we're going to start driving positive cash flow from this point. It is a turnaround story, and I think we've reached that inflection point. So we'll be judged on earnings, I'm sure, going forward as well.
And you expect to go EBITDA positive? You're going to turn a profit then?
For the first time.
Okay.
Yes.
Subject to market conditions. I noticed that was one of your sort of riders in that statement. What market conditions would favour Wood Bois to do that?
It really is about logistics right now, and in common with so many industries around the world, we are subject to shipping delays from time to time, and being able to get hold of containers.
How about the staffing side of things? In the Western markets, we hear a lot about the fact that there's unfilled positions because you haven't got the skill base, you can't afford to get staff in from other companies, it's difficult to hire. Are you seeing that in Gabon or Mozambique?
Not really. People need jobs in Africa. And actually, that's one of the things that the governments are very keen for as well. And that's why they encourage us. And at a more senior level, I think people are really interested in what they're doing, the fact that we're working with a very strong purpose. And I find that makes it easier for us to attract really talented staff and committed staff.
Okay, let's wrap all this up and take a look at where you go from here. What are the catalysts you're looking for future growth? Are you going to grow by acquisition, or are you just going to expand the business? What's the company going to look like in the years to come?
Yeah, so in the cash generative part of the business, the core part of the business, of course we want to grow. The opportunity on African export of hardwood is about $4 billion a year. The global hardwood market is $40 billion a year. I feel we can capture 2 or 3% of both of those markets. So there's solid growth to come there. But the very exciting part on top of that is the carbon sequestration part. And the first piece of land that we're looking for will be between 20 and perhaps 40 or 50,000 hectares. Bear in mind, Dartmoor, to give you some perspective, is 35,000 hectares. Now, we won't be able to afford to do that ourselves. It's not the cash for that. Those projects won't come from our balance sheet. We'll be partnering with a large corporate or large corporates to do that.
And the state, is the state interested in partnering you on that, or not?
Very much so. And I think one thing perhaps people missed is that Gabon passed their carbon law after 3 years going through Parliament on the 13th of September this year, which is a very, very important piece of legislation.
Okay. Paul, thanks indeed for
coming.
Jeremy. It's a pleasure to have you on board there. That's Paul Dolan, who's Chief Executive of Wood Bois, a company that is growing into other areas, not just forestation, as it looks to expand beyond Gabon and Mozambique. For more videos from us here at IGTV, join us on Twitter at IGCom, Instagram, and subscribe to our YouTube channel.